Hello, 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 and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I'm your host, Marshall Kirkpatrick, and I'd like to welcome you to this special work from home edition of the Sprinklr Coffee Club, perhaps the first of many. Here on the Sprinklr Coffee Club, we talk about the changing world. We talk about digital transformation, customer experience, an increasingly networked world, how we can watch out for pitfalls, how we can optimize for opportunities, and how we can learn from and listen to and love the people that our organizations come in contact with every day. And I am really excited for today's guest. We have a futurist and our first guest from the land of Europe, from the UK in particular. I am excited to welcome the founder of the consultancy Futures Forward, Joana Lenkova. Hello, Joana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Marshall. Thank you for the invitation. I'm super excited to be joining you.
Me too. How is the day treating you so far?
Very well. It's actually 8 o'clock here, and I'm keeping energized.
Wonderful, wonderful. Folks, I would like to invite you, apparently no matter what the hour, it is appropriate to drink coffee here with the those of us on the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I'm drinking coffee, Joanna's drinking coffee. It's about 8 p.m. Her time. And so feel free to pour a cup yourself. And if you would like to participate in the conversation, if you're watching on YouTube, we want to invite you to jump in and add questions, comments, thoughts to the question field there, and our producer Eric will help bring them into our conversation. Feel free at any time to do so. Joana, I am so excited to finally get an opportunity to connect with you here. I've been reading your work online for some time, and there's nothing like getting to speak directly and to do it in public. It's a lot of fun. I would like to begin our conversation today by asking you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a futurist, how you got involved in foresight.
Absolutely. And I'm very excited to be speaking to you as well. I have been working on a few pieces which we have discussed. So it's a great pleasure to actually be able to discuss them live with you. So looking forward to it. Just a little bit about my background and how I got into futurism. I was working for Disney here in the UK, responsible for several different markets. And I was working in strategy for Disneyland Paris in particular. I joined the company in 2015, and being trained in classic strategy, we had a set of actions that were planned for the year. However, as soon as I joined, there were many external factors that started to impact the strategy. First, there was the migrant crisis. There were many things preventing the transportation from the UK, for example, to France. Then there were the unfortunate terror attacks, which obviously no one could have predicted. Then we started to talk about Brexit and exiting the European Union. And no matter how much data we had, no one could have predicted that all of these things are basically going to create the perfect storm and the business is going to be impacted. Fortunately for me, in 2016, so about a year, even less than a year than I joined, I met the fantastic Yvette and Frank duo from the Future School, who came and trained a bunch of us at Disney to be futurists. We underwent a 3-day training, and we actually understood and learned a methodology by which we were able to look further into the future and start taking into account external factors, macro driving forces that may impact our consumers and our business as well. So since then, I was extremely taken by this. I felt that this really helps me in my current role I can use the tools for long-term strategy, but some of the tools I can even use on a daily basis in my more short-term strategic planning. And it has impacted me so much that I actually decided to do a career change, and I founded Futures Forward last year, where I do consultancy, and I'm also partnering with the Future School to do trainings, because I feel that this is definitely something that skill that everyone should have in our very uncertain times.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love Yvette and Frank's work online. I've been following them for several years too. They're really inspiring, and that's fantastic to hear that you got to go through their training and are now partnering with them. Can you tell us a little bit about how strategy changed for you from the classical training you had taken to this more foresight oriented training? What's the end result? How would you characterize the change in your strategic thinking?
Well, I think I have really focused on understanding the history of strategy, and I read a lot about where strategy originated, and it's actually quite an interesting story. If we look back at the warring states in China, that's about 475 years before Christ, so BC. The Chinese states were constantly at war, and there were traveling consultants who were consulting in the strategy of war. One of them was Confucius. So this is how basically the first paid consultants in strategy where they originated from. So this strategy originates in war, and I had a long chat about this with colleagues, and also I was thinking a lot about that, because I think we live in a time where it's not necessary to be in war with our competitors. This might have been valid in the 60s, where it was pretty clear who your competitors were, and the purpose of your company was solely, or for the majority or the bigger purpose of the company was profit. Nowadays, we are really companies are impacting a lot of other stakeholders, and the purpose of companies is changing. We're talking about the economics of mutuality, which is a new concept, relatively new concept, that was started about 10 years ago, where we're seeing how companies are impacting the future of the environment, the future of people, the future of the employees of the company. And the sole purpose of the company is not necessarily only profits. We need to be doing more good, and at the end, we're actually getting more profits. So strategy it seems that it has always been quite an internally focused discipline. The way strategic planning has been done is usually driven by the financial interest of shareholders. And in order to seemingly mitigate risk, we are looking at past performance and we are extrapolating it into the future. That way, we're creating an official future, and we feel more comfortable by thinking that this is how things are going to unfold. Unfortunately, there are many possible futures, and as futurists, we like to work with different scenarios. We like to monitor the external environment and have a combination of creative thinking and imagination based on the trends that we're seeing now, to try and imagine the possible futures, as well as the data from the past. So for me, strategy is changing in a way that when the times are volatile and uncertain, you really need to look outside of your immediate environment. You need to look for different trends. You need to imagine what may happen when the trends collide. And it's really important to be aware of the macro environment and really be agile and ready to face the challenges that the future is going to pose.
That feels so much more evident this week and this month than it had been perhaps to so many of us over the years past. But you have done some research with organizations that have been thinking along these lines for some time now. I wonder, what are some of what's one of your favorite examples of a company putting this kind of thinking into action?
Well, I have a couple of examples, and I think it's important that I share both because they have taken a different approach to futurism and to scenario planning. So my first example is based on some work that Kedge and the Future School have done, and it is about Disney. The approach that Disney has taken is they have integrated the futures thinking within the culture of their organization. And everything started about 10 years ago when the chairman of Walt Disney International asked his HR team, due to automation, we need to think about the future of talent and what are the skills of people that we will be hiring, what are the needed skills in the future. But what started off as something within the HR team, it actually turned into an organization-wide initiative. And at the end, Kedge had trained about 500 different people. And I really loved being part of this team because it gave you the opportunity to see things from a very different perspective. It was a very diverse team. Hierarchy didn't matter because with innovation and with creative thinking, the best idea doesn't necessarily come from the top. And it really ran as kind of in the background as a part of the culture. With Rolls-Royce is another example that I included in my research. And Rolls-Royce, they did scenario planning workshop, and that was required initiated because they had the perfect storm in 2014. So they operate in different businesses. No one could have predicted that everything that could have happened in that year. And the result was their shares dropped by 50%, which is massive. There were talks about selling parts of the company, and there was a new CEO that came in 2015. So in 2015, they created some scenarios about the future, and differently to Disney, they actually, it was a one-off exercise that their leadership team did. And as far as I'm aware, until this day, they sense check their strategies against these scenarios for the future. So these are the two companies that I know best in the two examples. And strategic foresight and futures thinking can be integrated in many different ways, but it's always helpful.
What are some examples of the kinds of things that come out of scenario deliberation like that? What does it look like to do that work?
There are many different things that you can do, and a lot of people think that you have to go through the whole process and deliver scenarios, and that is sometimes it can take a very long time. You can even inform your strategy just by looking at the different trends that we see, thinking about what they may create in the future when 2 or 3 or 5 of them collide. And even before you get to actually writing the narrative and creating a scenario, you can already have a think and understand whether and to what extent the collision of these trends can impact your business, or it can impact your consumers. So it's something, it could be a relatively simple exercise that will inform your strategy a lot.
Oh, fantastic. And I presume that many organizations say, we don't have time for that. Let's just talk about the most urgent pressing concerns and the financial bottom line. And once those things are dealt with, then maybe we can spend some time thinking about the future and thinking about big picture strategies. How do you relate when organizations take that approach?
Well, I have been in that place, so I can definitely relate. And I think it's always finding the right balance, and it's always very difficult to find the right balance. But it's almost you really need to prioritize thinking about the future, because if you don't, then the future just happens and you're reactive to it. Kedge's philosophy and the future school philosophy is that you have to be proactive in shaping the future, and it's almost necessary to plan time and to find time and to put it in your priorities. But I have been in that situation. I think a lot of us are in this situation most of the time, and that's the ongoing dilemma between exploiting the resources that you have versus exploring what the next innovation would be, or the future of your company is going to be. And I think we all need to realize that if something is working today and making money today, and I think a lot of us realize that now, that's not a guarantee that the same thing will work in the same way tomorrow. There is the notion of ambidexterity, which is, again, a term describing that balance between exploiting and exploring. And it's really interesting because it's a very living thing. You cannot say, okay, 50% of your time has to be dedicated to exploitation and 50% has to be dedicated to exploration. This can change from day to day. And I think the most important thing is the realization of the two. Both of them have very different KPIs as well. So a lot of times, again, when we're driven by shareholder value and by finances and by return on investment right away or within a year, you can, if you're judging the exploration and the innovation by the same terms, you can just write them off as failure. And they're not necessarily a failure. Experimenting is part of strategy, especially when you live in an environment where the average lifespan of a company has shortened so much, and there's so many things happening that require for you to either be a disruptor or be disrupted.
Have you seen specific KPIs for the Explore class of functions? Are there, I'm wondering, especially from a perspective of mutuality and the ambidextrous organization, what have you seen KPIs that can be used to measure that work that doesn't have the immediate financial returns but still feels like a solid KPI?
Well, I suppose you can have KPIs around numbers of innovations, or if we look at the mutuality, it could be an impact on the value, on the whole value chain. It could be a KPI around improvement of people's lives in certain way. It could be an environmental KPI, such as the carbon footprint, for example. We like to have measurable things, and sometimes with innovation, it's quite difficult to have a particular measure. But there could be different KPIs for the exploration phase. It's especially easier now with all the talk we have around climate change and CO2 negative or CO2 at a level zero impact.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about the economics of mutuality and what you have seen in the real world regarding that? And that's a pretty dreamy sounding concept. What does it look like in the real world?
Well, I'm discovering it myself in the recent months, and I'm very excited by the story. So the story, as I have heard it, is that Mars, the company Mars, which is still a privately owned company, in 2007, the board sat down. So that's before the financial crisis. They sat down and they said, well, basically, how much profit is a normal profit to have? Are we making too much money? Considering that if you look at the long term, it makes sense that they've asked this question, because if you are making too much profit now, maybe you're squeezing somebody down the line too much, and maybe they're not going to succeed in the future, and that can be detrimental to you in the future. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing the story. I wasn't there when it happened, but I thought it's quite a original question to ask. And at the same time, it makes complete sense. So then the economists who worked for Mars started looking at different models, which I'm currently exploring. I know that there are many companies that, and many business units that are testing the concept. And one of the examples that I recently read about was Marks and Spencer and their food division. And they created different KPIs in regards to sustainability, and not only for themselves, but for every one of their suppliers. And at the end, they actually made more profit out of that. So they achieved more efficiency, they saved energy, and it was just a better satisfaction as well. So that's another KPI, employee satisfaction, which is hard to measure. But we talk a lot about transformation and change, but at the end of the day, it's not about the technology and the digital side of it. It's about the people. So that's one of the good examples that I came across. Example.
And that one is particularly interesting to me because it sounds like it's coming from a really networked perspective, thinking about the whole supply chain and all the partners that the food business there in question is working with. And that is something that we think about a lot. And I think that it brings to mind a recent guest on Sprinklr Coffee Club, John Hagel, who argued that the current state of the world is one where economies of scale are in large organizations are no longer a competitive advantage because of their ability to drive efficiency. Instead, because that has diminishing returns. Instead, the real competitive advantage from scale is to drive learning and insight from a whole network of stakeholders altogether. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, and then we do have a question from the audience as well.
I do have to, I completely agree, and I think again, coming back to the exploit explore, one of the most important things for it to function correctly and to find the right balance at the right time is for the leadership to be able to first be aware that the KPIs are different and not measure them by the same KPIs, but also to transfer the knowledge, for example, and the resources and the tools from the exploit unit to the exploration phase. I focused one of the research that I did, I focused actually on large organizations and like Disney and Rolls-Royce to try and understand how flexible they are and what are the ways of exploration, because we think that startups and smaller companies are better suited to innovate, but that's not always the case, because large organizations have a lot of things that can support them through hard times, and they also have the leverage to partner with smaller organizations, and they do have the opportunity to innovate and be disruptors as well.
And that sounds like those are a number of different examples of ways that resources can be transferred from the exploit function over to the explore function, without which the exploration is less likely to be successful, and ultimately the organization is less likely to be successful. That's intriguing. Let's go to this question from a live viewer. I think this is a really interesting one. The member of the audience asks this: what are your recommendations, Joanna, for bringing this process into daily life?
It is an amazing question, and it's not easy to do, but once you learn the different tools and once you agree with and understand the way of thinking, it becomes easier. One of the things that we talk a lot about is the constant scanning of the environment, meaning you have to read different sources, different information, even make yourself step outside of your field of interest, especially if you're looking for innovation. That's a must. Have different discussions, sometimes even better if they're opposing views. And once you do that for a while, you're going to start and spot different trends and different information that will be helpful for you in taking decisions. I know it doesn't sound very tangible, but it's actually proven that it rewires your brain in a different way. So the more you scan and the more you look at information outside of your immediate interest, obviously the more connections you start to make between this information. So that's just one example. In another webcast, I shared one of my favorite tools, which is a super simple tool, but it just makes so much sense. And it's called the probability impact matrix. It's a simple matrix where you plot different patterns that you've spotted or different trends based on how probable you think, how probable it is for them to happen, for different trends or events to happen, and how much impact they will have on your business. And based on that, the higher the impact and the higher the probability, then you know that this needs to be within your strategy. And it's a very easy way to sense check whether you have considered that or not. And another thing to mention, which we didn't speak about, is so the training that I got from the Future School, we were trained to scan in different categories. So the categories are social, technological, environmental, economical, and political. So you need to be really reading a lot and being very, very curious. And by using these simple tools, you're able to start implementing them into your daily life without even noticing the difference, without even making a huge effort to think that way. It just becomes a part of who you are.
That's incredible. And what methods do you employ to do that? Do you use an RSS reader, Twitter lists? How do you set up systems to bring in information from those different fields?
Oh, I would love to hear from you as well and from other people. I do all sorts of things. I read different magazines. I am constantly reading articles. I am a lot on LinkedIn as well, seeing what other people are doing. I use Twitter. I watch the news. So it's just constantly being alert. And again, you have to look at different sources. And I know sometimes it's difficult with the increase of fake news, but you have to sense check your story and fact check your story as well. So once you see it coming up a few times, then you can start being curious about it and understand more about it and start spotting where it may go.
Mm-hmm. So deliberate reading across specific categories beyond your natural inclination and including dissenting or differing opinions, followed up by pattern recognition and sense making to determine whether emerging trends are real or whether they don't warrant further investigation.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. and like a real intellectual challenge. And it's fantastic to hear that you have been taking those practices and skills into some of the biggest companies in the world to help them make real tangible changes based on practices like that and the resulting insights. That's a lot of fun. Joanna, what is the best way for people to find your work online, to follow your progress, and to continue learning from you?
I have a website. My website is futures-forward.com. I am also on LinkedIn and on Twitter. My Twitter handle is _futuresforward. So I would be looking forward to connecting to new people and learning with them and from them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I feel like I have learned a lot and really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much for drinking coffee late at night and joining us for this conversation. Folks, thank you
very
to
much.
Everyone who joined us. You're welcome. Thank you. And have a fantastic rest of the day. Folks, we will see you on the next Sprinklr Coffee Club. Please give a like and subscribe in whatever channel you're watching this so that you will receive notification of subsequent conversations. And keep your eyes peeled for highlight clips from this one. I think we've got some really thought-provoking highlights coming out of this conversation. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Marshall.